Hey guys, welcome aboard to Snoozy Voyager. Tonight, we're cracking open one of history's strangest mysteries, why eggs and bunnies became Easter symbols. Not the Sunday school version, not the pastel-coloured greeting card fantasy. I'm talking about the real, weird, pagan meets Christian, fertility-obsessed, rabbit-worshipping origin story that somehow became the second biggest holiday on the Western calendar. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this sort of thing. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and someone's out there Googling why do we hide eggs for Jesus. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe tuck your feet in so the imaginary chocolate bunnies can't nibble your toes. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why Easter, a holiday celebrating resurrection, became synonymous with decorated eggs and hyperactive rabbits? Was there really a cosmic rabbit deity involved? Did ancient pagans actually worship hares under full moons? What do eggs, chicken eggs, have to do with anything remotely spiritual? Could the whole thing just be an elaborate excuse to eat candy shaped like baby animals? Would Christianity have survived without adopting every single spring festival it came across? And why, in the name of all that is holy, are we telling children that a giant bunny breaks into their homes at night? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up somewhere between ancient Mesopotamia and medieval Europe. The year as well, it depends on which century we're talking about. You have no idea why there's a rabbit in your garden, a painted egg in your hand, and a holiday calendar that makes absolutely no sense. Good luck. Long before anyone ever heard the name Easter, long before chocolate eggs and pastel baskets, humanity celebrated spring in the most obvious way possible, by obsessing over fertility. Not the polite metaphorical kind, the literal, agricultural, please let our crops grow or we'll starve kind. Ancient civilizations across the globe noticed that spring brought life back from winter's death grip. Flowers bloomed, animals mated, seeds sprouted, and they decided this was worth celebrating with festivals, rituals, and a shocking amount of symbolism involving reproduction. The Mesopotamians honoured Ishtar, goddess of fertility and war, with spring celebrations. The Greeks had their own versions with Demeter and Persephone. The Egyptians celebrated rebirth through Osiris. Everyone, it seemed, understood that spring wasn't just a season, it was a cosmic reset button. And naturally, eggs, literal symbols of life emerging from apparent nothingness, became sacred objects. So did rabbits, creatures so famously reproductive that even ancient farmers joked about it. Think about it from their perspective. You've just survived winter. Barely. Your food stores are running low, your livestock is thin, and half your village didn't make it through the cold months. Then one morning you wake up and the world is green again. Flowers are pushing through frozen ground, birds are returning, the sun is warm. It feels like magic because, to pre-scientific humans, it basically was magic. The earth was literally coming back from the dead. No wonder they threw parties. These spring festivals weren't quaint garden parties with tea and cookies. They were loud, messy, ecstatic celebrations that often involved dancing, drinking, ritual sacrifices, and yes, sex. Lots of symbolic sex. Because fertility wasn't just about crops, it was about survival. If the fields didn't produce, people starved. If the animals didn't breed, there was no meat, no milk, no wool. Spring was humanity's annual reminder that life beats death, but only if you honour the forces that make life possible. The Mesopotamians celebrated Akitu, a 12-day festival honouring the goddess Ishtar, also known as Inanna, who descended into the underworld and returned, bringing life back with her. Sound familiar? The Greeks had the Eleusinian Mysteries, secret rites celebrating Persephone's return from Hades, which coincided with the spring planting season. The Egyptians linked spring to the resurrection of Osiris, god of the afterlife and agriculture. Every culture had their version, but the theme was universal. Death doesn't get the last word. And the symbols they used? Eggs were everywhere. An egg looks dead, just a smooth, lifeless shell, but crack it open and there's potential for life. It's a perfect metaphor for resurrection, renewal and hope. Ancient peoples painted eggs, offered them to gods, buried them in fields to ensure good harvests, and exchanged them as gifts to celebrate the return of spring. The egg wasn't invented as an Easter symbol. It had been a spring symbol for thousands of years before Christianity even existed. Rabbits and hares were equally popular, and for obvious reasons. These animals breed prolifically, producing litter after litter throughout the spring and summer. If you wanted a living, breathing symbol of fertility, you couldn't do better than a rabbit. Ancient peoples associated them with goddesses, with the moon, and with the unstoppable force of life asserting itself. They were sacred, magical, and a little bit absurd, which made them perfect for celebrating the chaotic, joyful explosion of life that is spring. So when Christians eventually arrived on the scene, they didn't invent Easter symbols from scratch. They walked into a world already overflowing with spring festivals, sacred eggs, and fertility rituals. And they did what any smart religious movement does. They adapted, absorbed, and rebranded. Here's where things get wonderfully murky. According to the Venerable Bede, an 8th century English monk with a flair for documentation, there was once a Germanic goddess named Eostra. She was supposedly the goddess of spring and dawn, and the Anglo-Saxons celebrated her during a month called Eosterminath, roughly corresponding to April. Her symbols? You guessed it, hares and eggs. The problem? Bede is literally the only historical source that mentions her. No inscriptions, no statues, no archaeological evidence. Some scholars think he made her up to give Anglo-Saxon paganism a tidy origin story. Others argue absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Either way, this possibly fictional goddess became the namesake for Easter in English and German, so every time you say Easter, you might be invoking a deity that may never have existed, or you're honouring a very real, very forgotten springtime ritual. Either way, it's delightfully weird. Bede was writing in the early 700s, trying to document the history and customs of the Anglo-Saxon people who had converted to Christianity a century or so earlier. He was meticulous, scholarly, and generally reliable. But when he mentioned Eostri, he gave almost no details, just a sentence or two. The Anglo-Saxons had a goddess named Eostri. They celebrated her in the spring month named after her, and that's about it. No myths, no temples, no hymns, just a name and a month. Scholars have been arguing about this ever since. Some point out that similar-sounding goddesses appear in other Germanic traditions. There's Ostara in Old High German folklore, though evidence for her is also thin. Others note that Eostra might simply derive from an ancient word for east or dawn, which would make sense for a spring goddess since spring is associated with sunrise, new beginnings, and light returning after winter's darkness. The etymology is compelling. Eoster, Easter, East, Dawn, all linguistically connected. But here's the frustrating part. We have zero other references to her. None. The Anglo-Saxons left behind plenty of evidence of their pagan beliefs, burial sites, inscriptions, place names, linguistic traces, but Eostre, nothing. It's possible she was a minor local deity whose worship didn't leave much of a footprint. It's possible Bede misunderstood or misremembered something. It's also possible he invented her to provide a pagan origin story that would make the Christian Easter seem like a natural evolution rather than a foreign import. What we do know is that Anglo-Saxon pagans definitely celebrated spring. They honoured gods and goddesses associated with fertility, agriculture and the changing seasons. They used eggs and hares in their rituals. Whether they called the spring goddess Eostre or something else, or whether they even personified spring as a single goddess, remains a mystery. But the name stuck. When Christians in England needed a word for their spring resurrection festival, they reached for Eostre's name, or at least the name of the month, and it worked beautifully because the themes aligned: rebirth, renewal, light overcoming darkness. So today, English speakers say Easter and German speakers say Ostern, and both words may trace back to a goddess who might never have existed. It's like naming a holiday after a rumour, and honestly, that feels very human. We love stories, even uncertain ones. We love connecting the present to a mythic past, even if that past is hazy and half-invented. Eostre may be a ghost, but she's a ghost with staying power. Her name, real or imagined, has endured for over 1,000 years, attached to one of Christianity's most important holidays. Not bad for a goddess nobody can prove was real. Let's talk about rabbits. Or more accurately, let's talk about why every ancient culture looked at rabbits and thought, yes, this creature represents the unstoppable force of life itself. Rabbits breed a lot, constantly. A single female rabbit can produce dozens of offspring in a year. Ancient peoples who lived much closer to nature than we do noticed this immediately. In many pre-Christian European cultures, the hare, close cousin to the rabbit, became a symbol of fertility, abundance, and the regenerative power of spring. The hare was sacred to various goddesses linked to the moon and often depicted in springtime rituals. But here's the twist. Rabbits and hares were also seen as mysterious, even magical. They were creatures of the liminal spaces, dawn, dusk, the edges of forests. In Celtic mythology, hares were shapeshifters. In Germanic folklore, they were witches' familiars. So the Easter Bunny isn't just cute and fluffy. It's descended from a long line of mystical, moonlit, absurdly prolific creatures that ancient peoples both revered and feared. Rabbits and hares are not the same animal, by the way. Hares are larger, faster, and wilder. They don't burrow, they nest above ground. Rabbits are smaller, more social, and live in underground warrens. But ancient peoples often conflated the two, and for good reason. Both animals share the same astonishing reproductive capacity. A female rabbit, called a doe, can become pregnant again immediately after giving birth, a biological phenomenon called superfetation. She can literally be pregnant with 2 litters at once. Hares aren't far behind. The result? Endless babies, constantly. To ancient farmers, this was both useful and symbolic. Useful because rabbits were a reliable food source, easy to trap, easy to breed in captivity, and prolific enough that you could eat some and still have plenty left over. Symbolic because their fertility made them perfect representatives of spring's life-giving energy. If you wanted to honour the forces that made the world fertile again after winter, you honoured the rabbit. But rabbits weren't just symbols of abundance, they were weird. They're crepuscular, meaning they're most active at dawn and dusk, those in-between times that ancient peoples associated with magic and transformation. They're silent, fast, and seemingly appear out of nowhere. In Celtic and Germanic folklore, hares were often depicted as supernatural creatures. Witches could transform into hares to sneak around at night. Hares could bring good luck or bad omens depending on how they crossed your path. They were associated with the moon because of their nocturnal habits, and because in some cultures people saw the shape of a hare in the patterns on the moon's surface rather than a man's face. The connection between hares and goddesses runs deep. The Roman goddess Venus, the Greek Aphrodite, the Norse Freya, all were associated with hares. These weren't just fertility goddesses, they were goddesses of love, beauty, desire, and the creative forces of nature. The hare was their sacred animal, a living emblem of life's relentless drive to continue itself. So when Christianity arrived in Northern Europe and encountered these hare-worshipping, egg-painting spring festivals, they faced a choice. Condemn the rabbit as pagan, or absorb it into the new religion. They chose absorption. The hare became the Easter hare, then the Easter bunny, and its pagan origins were quietly folded into the Christian celebration of resurrection. The rabbit's fertility, once a symbol of nature's power, became a symbol of new life in Christ. But let's be honest, the Easter bunny is still fundamentally pagan. It's a creature of the earth, of reproduction, of wild, untamed nature. You can dress it in pastel and give it a basket, but underneath, it's still the sacred hare of ancient spring festivals, hopping through history, impossible to tame. The egg is one of humanity's oldest and most universal symbols. It appears in creation myths from China to Greece, from Africa to Polynesia. Why? Because an egg is a perfect metaphor. Life contained, protected, waiting to emerge. For ancient peoples celebrating spring, eggs represented the rebirth of the world after winter's death. They were decorated, painted, offered to gods, buried with the dead, and exchanged as gifts. In Persia, eggs were dyed red for Nowruz, the spring equinox festival. In ancient Rome, eggs were given as springtime presents. In Eastern European traditions, elaborately decorated eggs called pisanki carried protective and symbolic meanings. The egg wasn't just food. It was a sacred object, a cosmic symbol, a tiny universe waiting to crack open. Christianity didn't invent the egg as a symbol, it inherited one that was already thousands of years old and simply gave it a new meaning. Christ emerging from the tomb, life triumphing over death. Think about what an egg is. It looks dead. It's smooth, hard, inert. There's no visible sign of life. You could hold an egg in your hand and have no idea that inside, if conditions are right, an entire living creature is forming. Then one day it cracks, and out comes life, fragile, wet, blinking, but unmistakably alive. It's transformation, it's resurrection, it's the ultimate symbol of potential realized. Ancient creation myths understood this instinctively. In Chinese mythology, the universe itself was born from a cosmic egg. In Hindu tradition, the golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, floated in the primordial waters before splitting to form heaven and earth. In ancient Egypt, the god Pitar was sometimes depicted creating the world by cracking open an egg. The egg wasn't just a symbol of life, it was a symbol of creation itself, the origin point of everything. For spring festivals, the egg made perfect sense. Winter was death, cold, dark, lifeless. Spring was the egg cracking open, spilling life back into the world. Ancient peoples marked this transformation by decorating eggs, turning them into art objects that honours the sacredness of renewal. In Persia, eggs were dyed red for Nowruz, a festival celebrating the spring equinox that predates Islam by millennia. Red symbolised life, blood, vitality. The same symbolism Christians would later adopt for Easter eggs, representing Christ's blood. In ancient Rome, eggs were exchanged during springtime festivals as tokens of good fortune. In pagan Slavic traditions, eggs were buried in fields to ensure a good harvest or placed in the foundations of new buildings for protection. The egg was powerful, magical, sacred. It wasn't just a symbol. It was believed to carry actual protective or life-giving properties. When Christianity spread through these cultures, missionaries encountered deeply entrenched egg traditions. They could have tried to stamp them out, but that rarely works. Instead, they did what the church often did. They Christianized the symbol. The egg became a representation of the tomb of Christ, sealed, seemingly dead, but containing the promise of resurrection. The hard shell was the stone rolled across the tomb entrance. The cracking open was Christ emerging, victorious over death. It was brilliant theology and brilliant marketing. People didn't have to abandon their beloved spring egg traditions. They just had to reinterpret them through a Christian lens. By the Middle Ages, eggs had become fully integrated into Easter celebrations. They were blessed in churches, decorated with religious symbols and exchanged as gifts. Yeah, the Council of the Church even had to issue regulations about which colours were appropriate for Easter eggs. Red was the most popular, symbolising Christ's blood. But other colours carried meanings too. White for purity, gold for glory, green for new life. The egg's journey from pagan symbol to Christian icon is a perfect example of how holidays evolve. Nothing was lost, everything was layered. The egg still meant rebirth, renewal, and life emerging from apparent death. It just meant all those things in the name of Jesus now, and honestly, the symbolism works beautifully. Whether you see the egg as nature's resurrection or Christ's, the message is the same. Death is not the end. Christianity, as it spread across Europe, had a problem. People loved their old festivals. They loved their springtime celebrations, their fertility rituals, their symbolic eggs and sacred hares. The early church faced a choice. Try to stamp out these traditions entirely, or absorb them, Christianize them, and make them part of the new faith. Spoiler, they chose option 2. This wasn't unique to Easter. Christmas absorbed winter solstice festivals. Saints' feast days replaced pagan holy days. The church was remarkably pragmatic. If people wanted to celebrate spring with eggs and rabbits, fine, just make it about Jesus now. Pope Gregory I explicitly instructed missionaries not to destroy pagan temples, but to repurpose them as churches. The same logic applied to holidays. So Easter, the celebration of Christ's resurrection, landed right on top of ancient spring festivals. The eggs, the rabbits, the themes of rebirth and renewal, all repurposed, rebranded and reborn as Christian symbols. So this strategy was called inculturation, though that's a fancy modern term for something missionaries figured out through trial and error. When St. Patrick arrived in Ireland in the 5th century, he didn't try to eliminate Celtic festivals, he incorporated them. Bonfires for St. John's Day. Those were Christianized midsummer fires, the shamrock, a teaching tool using existing Irish symbolism. The same approach worked across Europe. When missionaries encountered Germanic tribes celebrating spring With egg decorating and hare worship, they didn't mount crusades against eggs. They said, "Great, let's talk about what those eggs really mean." The resurrection of Christ became the new framework for understanding old symbols. The egg, Christ's tomb, the hare, new life in Christ, the spring equinox, the triumph of light over darkness, are now understood as Christ's victory over death. This wasn't cynical manipulation. Well, maybe sometimes it was, but mostly it reflected a deep understanding of human nature. People need continuity. They need to feel connected to their ancestors, their land, and their traditions. Ripping away beloved festivals would have made Christianity feel foreign, imposed, and unwelcome, but allowing people to keep their festivals while gently reframing their meaning, that made Christianity feel like the fulfillment of what they'd been celebrating all along. Pope Gregory's famous letter to missionaries in England in the year 600 is remarkably explicit about this strategy. He wrote, "Do not destroy the temples of the English gods. Destroy the idols, purify the buildings, and turn them into churches. If the people are accustomed to sacrificing oxen, let them continue, but now let them do it in honor of Christian martyrs instead of demons. In other words, keep the form, change the content." This approach worked brilliantly. By the time Christianity had fully Christianized Europe, the religion was a rich tapestry of absorbed traditions, local customs, and reinterpreted symbols. Easter became a perfect example of this layering. The date was tied to ancient lunar calendars. The symbols, eggs, rabbits, spring flowers came from pagan fertility rites. The themes of death and rebirth echoed older myths, but it was all now understood through the lens of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. Purists might call this compromise or dilution, but it's really synthesis. Christianity didn't erase the past, it built on it. The result is a holiday that carries layers of meaning, geological strata of belief, culture and symbolism built up over millennia. You can celebrate Easter as a Christian and honour Christ's resurrection. You can celebrate it as a cultural participant and enjoy the eggs and candy. You can dig into its pagan roots and honour the earth's renewal. Or you can do all three at once because Easter, like most holidays, contains multitudes. The Church's genius was recognizing that symbols are flexible. An egg is an egg, but what it means depends on the story you tell about it. Christianity told a new story, and the egg fit perfectly. Easter doesn't have a fixed date. Unlike Christmas, which stubbornly stays on December 25th, Easter moves around the calendar like a theological game of musical chairs. Why? Because its date is tied to the lunar calendar, specifically the first Sunday after the first full moon following the spring equinox. Got that? Neither did most medieval Christians. The calculation became so contentious that entire church councils were convened just to argue about it. The Council of Nicaea in 325 attempted to standardize the date, but even then disagreements persisted between Eastern and Western churches. The result? Easter can fall anywhere between late March and late April, depending on the moon's whims. This astronomical confusion has roots in ancient spring festivals, which were also tied to lunar cycles and seasonal changes. So every year, when you check the calendar and wonder why Easter is early or late, you're experiencing a 2,000-year-old headache caused by trying to merge solar calendars, i.e. lunar cycles and religious tradition into one tidy package. Let's break down the calculation because it's genuinely bonkers. First, you need the spring equinox, the day when daylight and darkness are roughly equal, which falls around March 20th or 21st. Easy enough. Then you wait for the next full moon after that equinox. Still manageable. Then you go to the Sunday following that full moon. Okay, getting complicated, but we're not done. If the full moon falls on a Sunday, Easter is the next Sunday. Why? Because reasons. Historical reasons involving Jewish Passover calculations and early Christian attempts to distance themselves from Jewish practice, while still honouring the connection between Passover and Christ's crucifixion. The early Christians celebrated Easter in conjunction with Passover, which is itself a lunar festival falling on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan. But as Christianity spread beyond Jewish communities, tensions arose. Some Christians wanted to continue linking Easter to Passover, others wanted a distinctly Christian date. By the 2nd century, different regions were celebrating Easter on different days, which was awkward when you're trying to present a unified church. The Council of Nicaea in 325 tried to settle this. The bishops agreed that Easter should be celebrated on the same day throughout Christendom, and that day should be the Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Because calculating the spring equinox and tracking lunar cycles turned out to be astronomically complicated, literally. Different regions use different calendars, different methods of calculation, and different understandings of when exactly the equinox occurred. The Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Catholic Church eventually split on this issue, along with many others, and to this day, they often celebrate Easter on different dates. The West uses the Gregorian calendar, the East uses the Julian calendar. The result? 2 Easters, sometimes weeks apart. It's theologically awkward and practically confusing, but after nearly 2,000 years, everyone's just accepted it. For ordinary people, this moving date was maddening. Imagine trying to plan agricultural work, festivals and fasting periods around a date that jumps around the calendar every year. Medieval peasants didn't have printed calendars. In fact, they relied on the church to announce when Easter would fall, and the church relied on astronomers, mathematicians and calendar specialists to calculate it. Entire treatises were written on the computus, the method of calculating Easter's date. It was one of the most intellectually demanding tasks in medieval scholarship, requiring knowledge of astronomy, mathematics and theology. Why not just pick a fixed date like Christmas? Because Easter's connection to Passover and the lunar calendar was considered sacred, rooted in the biblical narrative of Christ's death and resurrection during Passover week. Changing it to a fixed solar date would sever that connection. So the church lived with the complexity, and so do we. The modern result is an annual scramble. Retailers don't know when to stock Easter candy. Schools don't know when to schedule spring break, and every year someone inevitably complains that Easter is too early or too late, as if the moon is supposed to care about their vacation plans. Easter's wandering date is a living fossil, a 2,000-year-old compromise between solar calendars, lunar cycles, Jewish tradition and Christian theology. It's messy, it's confusing, and it's never going away. By the medieval period, eggs had fully entered Christian symbolism. They were forbidden during Lent, the 40 days of fasting before Easter, which meant that by Easter Sunday, households had stockpiles of eggs they needed to use. Enter egg decoration, egg gifting, and egg-based festivities. In medieval Europe, eggs were blessed by priests, dyed red to symbolize Christ's blood and given as gifts. The red egg became a powerful symbol in Eastern Orthodox traditions, tied to legends of Mary Magdalene presenting a red egg to the Roman emperor. Eggs were also used in Easter games: egg rolling, egg tapping, egg hunting. These weren't just fun distractions. They were deeply symbolic acts celebrating life, resurrection, and the end of fasting. The egg had become holy, not in spite of its pagan origins, but because Christianity had successfully woven those origins into its own narrative. Medieval Lent was serious business. For 40 days leading up to Easter, Christians abstained from meat, dairy, and eggs. This wasn't a casual diet choice. It was a religious obligation enforced by the church and social pressure. Breaking the Lenten fast could result in public penance or worse, so chickens kept laying eggs, but nobody could eat them. What do you do with dozens of accumulating eggs? You preserve them, coating them in fat or wax, storing them in cool places, and you wait for Easter Sunday when the fast finally breaks. When Easter arrived, it was an explosion of feasting, and eggs were the centerpiece. Families would hard-boil dozens of eggs, dye them bright colors, and bring them to church to be blessed. The priest would sprinkle them with holy water, transforming them from ordinary food into sacramental objects. Taking blessed eggs home and eating them was believed to bring health, protection, and good fortune. The tradition of dyeing eggs red has a particularly beautiful legend attached to it. According to Eastern Orthodox tradition, Mary Magdalene travelled to Rome after Christ's resurrection to preach the gospel. She appeared before Emperor Tiberius, holding an egg, and proclaimed, "Christ is risen." Tiberius scoffed, saying a man rising from the dead was as likely as the egg in her hand turning red. At that moment the egg turned brilliant scarlet. Whether the legend is true or not, red eggs became central to Orthodox Easter celebrations, symbolizing both Christ's blood and the miracle of resurrection. In Western Europe, eggs were decorated with more varied colors and designs. Wealthy families could afford expensive dyes made from imported spices, while peasants used natural dyes from local plants: onion skins for brown, beets for pink, spinach for green. Some eggs were painted with religious symbols, crosses, fish, the letters ISS, a monogram for Jesus. Others featured more playful designs, flowers, animals, geometric patterns. Egg games became Easter traditions. Egg rolling, racing hard-boiled eggs down hills, was popular in England and later brought to America, where it eventually became the White House Easter egg roll. Egg tapping, two people tap their eggs together, and whoever's egg cracks loses, was a favourite among children and adults alike. These games weren't just entertainment, they had symbolic significance. The rolling egg represented the stone being rolled away from Christ's tomb. The cracked egg represented the tomb opening to reveal resurrection. Egg hunts probably originated as a way to let children find and gather the eggs that had been hidden or stored during Lent. Over time it evolved into an organised game, with adults hiding decorated eggs for children to discover. The search for hidden eggs became a metaphor for seeking Christ, for finding new life hidden in unexpected places. By the late Middle Ages, eggs had become so central to Easter that entire markets sprang up around them. Craftsmen created elaborate wooden or ceramic eggs for the wealthy. Jewelers even made decorative eggs from precious metals, precursors to the famous Fabergé eggs that would come centuries later. The egg had completed its journey from pagan fertility symbol to Christian sacrament. It was blessed, celebrated, gifted, and eaten with reverence. Medieval Christians understood that the egg carried layers of meaning, natural, spiritual, celebratory, and they honoured all of them. Medieval manuscripts are full of rabbits and hares, often in the margins doing inexplicably strange things. playing trumpets, fighting knights, riding snails. Art historians call these marginalia, and they reveal a medieval fascination with hares that went beyond agriculture. Hares appeared in religious texts as symbols of vigilance, purity, and, oddly, the Virgin Mary. Why? Because of a medieval belief that hares could reproduce without losing their virginity, a biological impossibility that somehow became theological metaphor. At the same time, hares were associated with witchcraft, shape-shifting, and pagan rituals. This duality, sacred and profane, holy and heretical, made the hare a perfect symbol for Easter's own dual origins, Christian resurrection layered over pagan spring rites. The medieval mind loved paradox, and the hare embodied it perfectly. If you've ever flipped through a medieval illuminated manuscript, you've probably noticed them. Tiny rabbits in the margins, seemingly unrelated to the main text. Sometimes they're dressed as monks. Sometimes they're jousting with each other. Sometimes they're hunting humans in a reversal of the natural order. These aren't random doodles. They're deliberate artistic choices, and they tell us a lot about how medieval people thought about hares. On one level, the hare represented vigilance. Medieval bestiaries, books describing animals and their symbolic meanings, claim that hares slept with their eyes open, always watchful for predators. This made them symbols of spiritual vigilance, the soul always alert for danger, always awake to God's presence. In this reading, the hare was a model Christian, never sleeping through prayer, never letting their guard down against sin. But there's another layer. Medieval people also believed, incorrectly, that hares were hermaphroditic and could conceive without mating. This bizarre bit of folk biology made the hare a symbol of the Virgin Mary, who conceived Christ without losing her virginity. In some medieval texts, the hare appears alongside Mary in nativity scenes or other religious imagery, a subtle nod to miraculous conception. At the same time, hares were deeply associated with witchcraft. Folk belief held that witches could transform into hares to move about undetected at night. There are dozens of medieval stories about hunters shooting a hare, only to discover the next day that a local woman had a mysterious injury in the same spot. The hare was liminal, neither fully wild nor fully tame, neither fully animal nor fully magical. It existed in the in-between spaces, and in-between spaces made medieval Christians nervous. This tension, holy and heretical, pure and profane, made the hare a perfect subject for marginalia. The margins of a manuscript were themselves liminal spaces, the edges of the page where the sacred text ended and the profane world began. Artists filled these margins with rabbits, often engaged in satirical or subversive activities, rabbits mocking knights, rabbits preaching to congregations of other animals, rabbits executing humans. These images were funny, yes, but they were also unsettling. They reminded viewers that the world was full of contradictions, that holiness and sin existed side by side, that even a symbol as innocent as a rabbit could carry darker meanings. The hare also appears in medieval passion imagery. Scenes of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Sometimes hares are shown at the foot of the cross or near the empty tomb, witnesses to the greatest act of resurrection in Christian theology. This positioning is deliberate. The hare, ancient symbol of spring and rebirth, now stands as witness to Christ's resurrection, the ultimate triumph of life over death. So when the Easter hare emerged in Germanic folklore, a magical creature that laid eggs and hid them for children, it was drawing on centuries of accumulated symbolism. The hare was sacred and secular, Christian and pagan, vigilant and mischievous. It could represent the Virgin Mary or a witch in disguise. It was Easter's perfect ambassador, an animal that contained contradictions and refused to be pinned down to a single meaning. The medieval mind understood that paradox is where truth lives, and the hare, more than any other creature, embodied that paradox beautifully. When the Protestant Reformation swept through Europe in the 16th century, reformers took aim at what they saw as Catholic excess. Saints' days, elaborate rituals, and yes, Easter traditions they deemed too pagan. In some Protestant regions, Easter egg hunts and rabbit symbols were discouraged or banned outright. Reformers wanted a pure Christianity, stripped of medieval and pagan accretions, but cultural traditions die hard. In Lutheran Germany, the Easter hare, Osterhase, persisted despite theological objections. Parents told children that a magical hare laid eggs and hid them in gardens. The story was absurd, biologically impossible, and utterly beloved. The Reformation couldn't kill the Easter bunny, it just made him controversial for a while. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, and within decades, Europe was religiously fractured. Protestants rejected papal authority, questioned centuries of church tradition, and demanded a return to biblical Christianity. Many of the Reformation's critiques were theological, about salvation, grace, and scripture, but they also extended to popular religious practices, and Easter traditions were definitely in the crosshairs. Protestant reformers were suspicious of anything that smelled too Catholic or too pagan. Saints' feast days, gone. Relics and pilgrimages, abolished. Elaborate church decorations, stripped away. The reformers wanted worship that was simple, biblical, and focused entirely on Christ. Easter itself was acceptable. The resurrection of Christ is biblical after all. But all the surrounding folk traditions, questionable. In parts of Switzerland, Scotland, and Puritan England, Easter celebrations were dramatically scaled back or eliminated. The Puritans, in particular, were deeply opposed to what they called popish holidays. They banned Christmas, Easter, and pretty much any celebration that involved too much joy, decoration, or folk custom. To them, Easter egg hunts and magical rabbits were pagan nonsense that distracted from the solemn reality of Christ's death and resurrection. But in Lutheran Germany, things went differently. Martin Luther himself was surprisingly tolerant of folk traditions. He reformed theology, but was less interested in stamping out cultural practices that brought people joy. So the Osterhase, the Easter hare, survived in Lutheran regions, even thrived. Parents told their children that a magical hare would visit on Easter morning, bringing coloured eggs and hiding them in the garden for children to find. Yes, it was absurd. Yes, rabbits don't lay eggs. But it was also charming, harmless, and deeply rooted in local tradition. The story of the Osterhase took on a life of its own. Children would build little nests out of grass or cloth and leave them in gardens or barns, hoping the hare would fill them with eggs overnight. The excitement of waking up Easter morning and discovering colourful eggs left by a mysterious hare became a beloved childhood experience. And because it happened in the context of Easter Sunday going to church, celebrating Christ's resurrection, parents didn't see a conflict. The hare wasn't replacing Jesus, it was just making Easter more fun for kids. Puritans disagreed vehemently. To them, the Easter hare was a lie, a deception, and a distraction from sacred truth. Why would you tell children a magical animal brought eggs when you could teach them about Christ? But the Lutheran approach won out culturally, at least in Germany, and eventually in much of Protestant Europe and America. The Reformation's failure to eliminate the Easter Bunny is a testament to the power of folk tradition. Theology can be reformed, church structures can be rebuilt, but cultural practices, especially ones tied to childhood joy and seasonal celebration, are incredibly resilient. The Easter Bunny survived the Reformation, survived Puritan bans, and eventually became a global icon. Reformers may have wanted a pure, unadorned Christianity, but people wanted coloured eggs and magical rabbits, and in the end, some of the people got what they wanted. The Easter Bunny as we know him today, basket-toting, egg-hiding, inexplicably cheerful, arrived in America with German immigrants in the 18th century, particularly in Pennsylvania Dutch communities. These settlers brought the tradition of Osterhaze, the egg-laying hare, and it spread quickly. American children were told to build nests for the Easter hare to lay coloured eggs in. Over time, the nests became baskets, the hare became a rabbit, and the tradition exploded into a national phenomenon. By the 19th century, Easter had become a major American holiday, complete with parades, new clothes, and an ever-growing pantheon of egg-related festivities. When German immigrants began arriving in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, they brought more than just their language and Lutheran faith. They brought their folk customs, their recipes, and yes, their Easter hare. The Pennsylvania Dutch, as they came to be known, corruption of Deutsch, meaning German, settled in tight-knit communities where they preserved their traditions fiercely, and the Osterhaus was one of the most beloved. American children in these communities were taught the same story German children had been told for generations. If you built a nest and left it in a sheltered spot, a barn, a garden, a corner of the house, the Easter hare would visit on Easter Eve and lay brightly coloured eggs in your nest. The children would wake up Easter morning, rush to their nests and discover eggs in red, yellow, blue and green, dyed with natural materials. The excitement was infectious. The tradition spread beyond German communities surprisingly quickly. American culture in the 18th and 19th centuries was a melting pot of European traditions, and Easter customs from different countries, German egg hunts, English Easter bonnets, French chocolate eggs, blended together into a uniquely American celebration. By the mid-1800s, Easter had become a major holiday, second only to Christmas in commercial and cultural significance. The Easter hare gradually transformed. In Germany, the Osterhaze was often depicted as a somewhat serious, even stern creature, more wild hare than cuddly bunny. But in America, the Easter hare softened, became rounder, friendlier, and eventually morphed into the Easter bunny we recognize today. A cheerful, anthropomorphic rabbit dressed in clothes, carrying a basket of eggs and candy. The shift from nests to baskets happened organically. Baskets were more practical, they could be carried, decorated and reused. They also allowed for more gifts. The Easter Bunny wasn't just bringing eggs anymore. He was bringing candy, toys and treats. By the late 1800s, American companies were mass-producing Easter baskets, filling them with candy eggs, chocolate rabbits, and marshmallow chicks. Easter had become commercialized, and the Easter Bunny was its mascot. The Easter Bunny also became public. By the early 1900s, department stores featured Easter Bunny photo opportunities. Parades included giant Easter Bunny floats. Postcards depicted jolly rabbits delivering eggs. The Easter Bunny went from folk tradition to cultural icon in less than 2 centuries. Today, The Easter Bunny is so deeply embedded in American culture that it's easy to forget he's only been here for about 300 years, and that his origins lie in German folk tales about a magical hare that laid coloured eggs. The story is absurd, biologically impossible, and utterly American. A blending of immigrant traditions, commercial opportunism, and a deep cultural love of whimsy. The Easter Bunny isn't going anywhere. He's here to stay, basket and all. In Victorian England, Easter became an opportunity for lavish displays of springtime elegance. The upper classes exchanged elaborately decorated eggs, some made of chocolate, others of porcelain or jewelled like Fabergé creations. Easter bonnets became fashionable. Easter cards were sent, rivaling Christmas cards in popularity. The Victorians, masters of sentimentality and symbolism, re-embraced Easter as a celebration of renewal, hope, and beauty. They didn't worry much about the pagan origins. They were too busy making everything pastel and perfect. The Victorian era was obsessed with making everything ornate, symbolic, and emotionally resonant. Death was romanticised, love was dramatised, and holidays became elaborate productions. Easter fit perfectly into this sensibility. It was a holiday about death and resurrection, mourning and joy, winter's darkness and spring's light. The Victorians took these themes and ran with them, transforming Easter into a spectacle of refinement and beauty. Easter cards became incredibly popular in the 1860s and 70s, mass-produced thanks to new printing technologies. These weren't simple greetings. They were intricate works of art featuring embossed flowers, near silk ribbons, lace borders, and sentimental verses about spring, hope, and divine love. Some cards had pop-up elements or hidden compartments. Sending and receiving Easter cards became a social ritual, a way to maintain connections and display good taste. The cards often featured chicks, lambs, rabbits, and flowers, symbols of innocence and new life that the Victorians adored. Easter fashion was equally important. The tradition of wearing new clothes on Easter Sunday, which has roots in medieval Europe, reached its peak in Victorian England. Easter was the first major holiday after the end of winter, and it marked the beginning of the spring social season. Upper-class women commissioned new dresses in light fabrics and pastel colours, Easter bonnets, elaborate hats decorated with ribbons, flowers, and sometimes even taxidermied birds. Became status symbols. Easter Sunday services were as much fashion shows as religious observances. People attended church to be seen, to display their wealth and taste, and to participate in the communal celebration of spring. Chocolate eggs emerged as luxury items during this period. European chocolatiers, particularly in France and Germany, had been experimenting with moulded chocolate for decades, but it was the Victorians who turned chocolate Easter eggs into a cultural phenomenon. Early chocolate eggs were solid, heavy, and expensive, affordable only by the wealthy. But as manufacturing techniques improved, hollow chocolate eggs became possible, making them cheaper and more accessible. By the late 1800s, chocolate eggs were being mass-produced and sold to the growing middle class. Victorian Easter eggs weren't just chocolate, though. Wealthy families commissioned elaborate decorative eggs made from porcelain, enamel, or even precious metals and gemstones. These eggs were never meant to be eaten. They were display pieces, heirlooms, symbols of wealth and refinement. The most famous examples are the Fabergé eggs created for the Russian imperial family, but English aristocrats had their own traditions of commissioning beautiful, ornate Easter eggs to give as gifts or display in their homes. The Victorians also popularised Easter egg hunts as organised ritualised events. What had been informal folk customs became structured games with rules, prizes, and elaborate staging. Wealthy families would hide decorated eggs throughout their gardens and estates, then invite children, or often from both the family and the local community, to search for them. The child who found the most eggs might win a prize. It was charity, entertainment, and social display all wrapped into one. Underneath all this elegance and sentimentality was the Victorian obsession with death and resurrection. The era was marked by high mortality rates, especially among children, and elaborate mourning rituals. Easter's message of life triumphing over death resonated deeply. The holiday became a way to process grief, to hope for a reunion with lost loved ones, and to celebrate the persistence of life despite suffering. The Victorians made Easter beautiful because they needed it to be, because beauty, hope, and renewal were antidotes to the ever-present shadow of death. Victorian Easter was fancy, yes, but it was also deeply felt. The elaborate eggs, the sentimental cards, the new clothes, all of it was a way of saying, winter is over, death doesn't win, and life is worth celebrating with every ounce of beauty and joy we can muster. In the 19th century, European chocolatiers, particularly in France and Germany, began crafting chocolate eggs as Easter treats. This wasn't just culinary innovation. It was the birth of Easter as a commercial holiday. By the early 20th century, companies like Cadbury in England were mass-producing chocolate eggs, and the tradition spread globally. The Easter egg hunt, once a folk custom involving real eggs, now featured foil-wrapped chocolates. Easter baskets overflowed with candy. The holiday had become sweet, profitable, and utterly detached from its religious roots in the minds of many celebrants. The history of the chocolate Easter egg begins with a problem. How do you mould chocolate into a hollow egg shape? Solid chocolate eggs existed first, but they were heavy, expensive, and difficult to eat. The breakthrough came in the mid-1800s when chocolatiers figured out how to create hollow chocolate shells using two-part moulds. The process was labour-intensive. Melted chocolate was poured into moulds, swirled to coat the interior, then cooled and carefully removed, but it worked. Hollow chocolate eggs were lighter, cheaper to produce, and far more practical. The French and Germans pioneered the technique, but it was the English who turned it into an industry. Cadbury, Fry's, and Rowntree's, Britain's major chocolate manufacturers, saw an opportunity. Easter was already associated with eggs, and chocolate was becoming more affordable thanks to industrial production and cheaper sugar from colonial plantations. Put them together, and you had a product that was symbolic, delicious, and marketable to the growing middle class. Cadbury's first chocolate Easter eggs appeared in 1875. They were plain, simple, and still relatively expensive, but they sold. Within a few years, Cadbury was decorating their chocolate eggs with chocolate piping, marzipan flowers, and eventually colourful foil wrappers. By the early 1900s, Easter eggs came in elaborate presentation boxes, some featuring spring scenes, rabbits, and flowers. Giving a chocolate Easter egg became a gesture of affection, a way to mark the holiday with something luxurious and special. But the real transformation came with mass production. By the 1920s and 30s, chocolate Easter eggs were everywhere. They came in every size, from tiny eggs sold in bulk to enormous showpieces weighing several pounds. Foil wrappers made them festive and colourful. Manufacturers began including small toys or trinkets inside hollow eggs, turning them into surprise packages. The chocolate egg had gone from luxury item to mass market phenomenon. This commercialization fundamentally changed Easter. What had been a religious holiday with folk customs became a retail event. Stores decorated for Easter weeks in advance. Advertisements featured chocolate bunnies, candy-filled baskets, and smiling children hunting eggs. The message was clear. Easter was about family, fun, and most importantly, buying things. The Easter basket evolved to accommodate this new reality. What had once been a simple nest or small container for a few dyed eggs now became a large wicker basket overflowing with chocolate eggs, jelly beans, marshmallow chicks, candy-coated almonds, and plush toy rabbits. The basket itself became part of the gift, often elaborately decorated with ribbons, artificial grass, and cellophane wrap. Parents competed to create the most impressive Easter baskets for their children. Critics complained that Easter was losing its religious meaning, becoming just another excuse for consumerism, and they weren't entirely wrong. For many families, especially those without strong religious ties, Easter became primarily about candy, egg hunts, and the Easter bunny. Church attendance might still happen, but the real focus was the secular celebration, the brunch, the baskets, the backyard egg hunt. But here's the thing, this isn't entirely new. Easter had always been layered with non-religious elements, pagan spring festivals, folk customs, community celebrations. The chocolate egg didn't destroy Easter's religious meaning. It just added another layer. Some people celebrated the resurrection of Christ. Some people celebrated spring. Some people just really liked chocolate. And increasingly, people did all three at once, seeing no contradiction. The chocolate Easter egg represents capitalism's ability to absorb and commodify anything, yes. But it also represents something deeply human. Our desire to mark important occasions with sweetness, gifts, and shared joy. Chocolate eggs made Easter accessible, affordable, and fun. And in a world that's often neither affordable nor fun, maybe that's not the worst thing a holiday tradition could do. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Easter, called Pascha, is the most important holiday of the year, far surpassing Christmas. The traditions are ancient, solemn, and deeply symbolic. Eggs are dyed red to represent Christ's blood and the joy of resurrection. The greeting "Christ is risen" is exchanged with "Truly, he is risen." Families gather for a feast after a strict Lenten fast, and the red egg becomes the centerpiece of celebration. The Orthodox tradition preserved and Christianized the ancient symbolism of the egg more explicitly than Western Christianity, making the connection between rebirth, resurrection, and the egg unmistakable. If you've ever attended an Orthodox Easter service, you know it's unlike anything in Western Christianity. The liturgy begins late Saturday night and continues past midnight into Easter Sunday. The church is dark. Everyone holds candles. At midnight, the priest emerges from behind the iconostasis, holding a single lit candle, and proclaims, "Come receive the light." Candles are lit from person to person until the entire church glows. Then the proclamation, "Christ is risen," and the congregation responds with thunderous joy. Truly, he is risen. It's not somber, it's explosive, celebratory, triumphant. This is the climax of the Orthodox liturgical year. Eggs are central to the celebration, but not in the cutesy, pastel, Easter bunny way of Western culture. Orthodox Easter eggs are red, deep blood red. The tradition is to hard-boil dozens of eggs on Holy Saturday. They'll then dye them red using commercial dye or natural ingredients like onion skins mixed with vinegar. The red symbolizes Christ's blood shed on the cross and the life that blood brings. Some families also paint or stamp religious symbols on the eggs: crosses, the letters ICX, CNIKA, Jesus Christ Conquers, images of churches or saints. The first egg dyed is considered especially sacred. It's kept year-round, often placed near the family's icon corner, and believed to bring protection and blessing to the household. This egg is never eaten. It's a holy object, a physical reminder of Christ's resurrection that remains in the home until the following Easter. On Easter morning, after the long midnight service and the exhausting joy of the celebration, families return home for a feast. But before anyone eats, there's a ritual: egg tapping. And 2 people each hold a red egg. One taps their egg against the other's while saying, "Christ is risen." The other responds, "Truly he is risen." Then they tap eggs, and whoever's egg cracks first loses. It's playful, competitive, and deeply symbolic. The cracking egg represents the tomb opening, life breaking through death. The Easter feast itself is overwhelming, especially after the strict Lenten fast. For 40 days, Orthodox Christians abstain from meat, dairy, eggs, and often wine and oil. By Easter morning, people are hungry for richness, for fat, for flavour. The table overflows: roasted lamb, cheeses, butter-rich breads, creamy soups, pastries filled with sweet cheese, and of course baskets of red eggs, blessed by the priest and now ready to eat. The Orthodox Easter greeting, "Christ is risen, truly he is risen," isn't just said once. It's repeated throughout the 40 days following Easter, called Bright Week. Strangers greet each other this way on the street. Families say it when they gather. It's both liturgical formula and genuine expression of joy. The resurrection isn't just remembered, it's lived, proclaimed, celebrated continuously. Orthodox Easter preserves something that Western Easter has somewhat lost: the sense of Easter as the central event of Christianity, the hinge on which everything turns. Christmas is important in Orthodoxy, but Easter is everything. Without the resurrection, nothing else matters. And that conviction is reflected in every aspect of the celebration: the late-night service, the triumphant liturgy, the red eggs, the joyful feasting. The red egg in Orthodox tradition isn't cute, it's not pastel. It's not about spring or bunnies or chocolate. It's blood and life, death and resurrection, the tomb cracked open and Christ emerging victorious. The symbol is ancient, pre-Christian, as we've discussed, but Orthodoxy kept its power intact, refusing to soften or sanitize it. The egg is still what it always was: life breaking through apparent death, a miracle wrapped in a shell. For Orthodox Christians, Easter isn't just a holiday. It's the proclamation at the heart of their faith, and the red egg, simple and profound, carries that proclamation in a way that words sometimes can't. It's a symbol you can hold, tap, crack open, and eat, making the resurrection not just a theological concept, but a physical, tangible, lived reality. In Ukraine and other Eastern European countries, pisanki, elaborately decorated eggs created using wax-resist dyeing, are an ancient folk art tied to pre-Christian spring rituals. Each symbol, colour and pattern carries meaning: protection, fertility, the cycles of life. These eggs were never eaten, they were kept as talismans. When Christianity arrived, pisanki were adapted into Easter traditions, but their pagan origins remained visible in every intricate design. Today, pisanki are recognized as both religious symbols and cultural treasures, a beautiful example of how old and new beliefs can coexist in a single egg. Making Pysanky is not easy. It requires patience, precision, and an understanding of symbolism passed down through generations. The technique is called wax-resist batik. You start with a raw egg, uncooked, because the egg must remain intact for years, and a tool called a kistka, which is essentially a tiny funnel on a stick. You melt beeswax, fill the kistka, and use it to draw designs on the egg. Then you dip the egg in dye, starting with the lightest colour, usually yellow. The wax protects the areas you've drawn, preventing them from taking the dye. Then you add more wax, draw more designs, and dip the egg in the next colour, orange, then red, then purple, then black. Each layer of wax and dye adds depth and complexity. When you're finished, you hold the egg near a flame to melt the wax, revealing the intricate multicoloured design beneath. The process can take hours for a single egg. Some Pysanky feature dozens of colours and layers, creating patterns so detailed they look almost impossible. The designs aren't random. Every symbol carries specific meaning. Triangles represent the Holy Trinity or the elements, where earth, fire, water. Stars symbolise life, growth, and the divine. Spirals represent the journey of life, eternity, and the turning of seasons. Birds represent the soul. Flowers represent beauty and rebirth. Geometric patterns protect against evil. Fish represent Christ. Deer represent prosperity and health. The combinations are endless, and each region of Ukraine has its own distinctive style, passed down through families like heirloom recipes. Before Christianity, Pysanky were believed to hold protective power. Eggs were created in early spring during rituals meant to ensure a good harvest, protect livestock, and keep evil spirits at bay. A pysanka placed in the corner of a field would bless the crops. One hung in a barn would protect animals. One given to a new bride would ensure fertility and a happy marriage. The egg wasn't just art. It was magic, a physical object charged with intention and symbolism. When Christianity arrived in Ukraine in the 10th century, the church could have banned Pysanky as pagan idolatry. Instead, it absorbed them. The eggs were now created for Easter, blessed by priests and given as gifts to celebrate Christ's resurrection. The symbols acquired new meanings. Triangles became the Trinity. Crosses represented Christ's sacrifice. Spirals symbolized eternal life through Christ. But underneath, the old meanings persisted. A pysanka could be Christian and pagan simultaneously, honouring Christ while also carrying the ancient protective power of pre-Christian ritual. The tradition nearly died in the 20th century. Under Soviet rule, Ukrainian cultural practices were suppressed. Religious expression was forbidden. Many families continued making pysanky in secret, teaching their children the designs and techniques in hushed voices, but the art form was endangered. After Ukraine gained independence in 1991, there was a resurgence of interest. Workshops, museums, and cultural organizations worked to preserve and revive the tradition. Today, pysanky are recognized by UNESCO as part of humanity's intangible cultural heritage. A well-made pysanka can last for decades if properly cared for. The uncooked egg inside gradually desiccates, becoming lighter and lighter until the shell is essentially hollow. The egg becomes fragile, precious, a delicate container of history and meaning. Some families keep pysanky made by grandmothers and great-grandmothers, eggs that carry not just religious symbolism but family memory. Easter isn't just a Western holiday. Variations of spring festivals exist worldwide, some Christianized, others purely secular or rooted in local traditions. In Latin America, Semana Santa features processions and passion plays. In the Philippines, Easter includes reenactments of the crucifixion. In Ethiopia, the Orthodox Festive celebration involves fasting, feasting, and colourful ceremonies. Each culture has adapted the themes of renewal, rebirth, and spring to fit their own history, climate, and beliefs. Let's start with Latin America, where Easter, or Semana Santa, Holy Week, is arguably more important than Christmas. In countries like Mexico, Guatemala, Spain, and throughout Central and South America, the week leading up to Easter is marked by elaborate processions. Life-size statues of Christ and the Virgin Mary are carried through streets on enormous platforms, accompanied by hooded penitents, brass bands, and crowds of faithful followers. In Antigua, Guatemala, the streets are covered in alfombras, intricate carpets made of coloured sawdust, flowers, and pine needles, only to be destroyed moments later when the procession walks over them. It's beautiful, ephemeral, and deeply symbolic. Life is fleeting, beauty is temporary, and resurrection comes through destruction. In the Philippines, Easter takes on an intensity that makes Western celebrations look tame. Some devotees participate in actual crucifixions, nailing themselves to crosses in acts of extreme penance and devotion. Others flagellate themselves publicly, bloodying their backs with whips embedded with glass or metal. The Filipino Catholic Church officially discourages these practices, but they persist, rooted in a blend of Catholic theology and pre-colonial indigenous beliefs about sacrifice and spiritual cleansing. For many Filipinos, Easter isn't just about celebrating resurrection. It's about physically embodying Christ's suffering. In Ethiopia, Easter, called Fasika, is the culmination of a 55-day fast during which Orthodox Christians abstain from all animal products. The fast is broken at midnight on Easter Sunday with a feast of dorowat, a spicy chicken stew, and injera, spongy flatbread. Churches are packed with worshippers dressed in white, holding candles, chanting ancient liturgies in Gebwes, a liturgical language older than Latin. Ethiopian Easter isn't tied to the Western calendar. It follows the Julian calendar, so it often falls weeks later than Western Easter. The celebration is joyful, communal, and deeply rooted in African Christian tradition that predates European colonialism. In Greece and the other Eastern Orthodox countries, Easter is marked by the midnight service where the priest announces Christos Anesti, Christ is risen, and the congregation responds Alithos Anesti, truly he is risen. Worshippers light candles from the paschal flame and carry them home, trying to keep them lit as a symbol of bringing Christ's light into their homes. Red eggs are cracked in a game called Sugrisma, and families feast on roasted lamb, symbolizing Christ as the Lamb of God. In Australia and New Zealand, Easter falls in autumn, not spring, which creates a delightful theological awkwardness. The symbolism of rebirth and new life happens while leaves are falling and temperatures are dropping. Some churches have tried to adapt by emphasizing harvest themes instead of spring renewal, but mostly, people just ignore the contradiction and eat chocolate eggs in the cooling weather. Australia even has an Easter bilby movement, promoting the bilby, an endangered native marsupial, as an alternative to the imported European rabbit. It's conservation meets chocolate marketing. In India, where Christians are a minority, Easter is celebrated with enthusiasm in regions like Goa, Kerala, and the northeast. Churches hold sunrise services, families dress in new clothes, and traditional Easter meals blend Indian spices with Christian symbolism. In Kerala, Syrian Christians, whose tradition dates back to the 1st century, you celebrate with a feast called appam and stew, and the service is conducted in a mixture of Malayalam and ancient Syriac. Even in non-Christian countries, spring festivals echo Easter's themes. The Persian Nowruz, the Jewish Passover, the Hindu Holi, all celebrate renewal, rebirth, and the triumph of life over death or light over darkness. These festivals remind us that Easter's core themes are universal, rooted in the human experience of surviving winter and welcoming spring. Christianity gave these themes a specific theological meaning, but the joy of spring belongs to everyone. Easter is now the second largest commercial holiday in many Western countries, behind only Christmas. Billions are spent on candy, decorations, greeting cards, and Easter brunches. The religious meaning competes with, and often loses to, marketing campaigns featuring animated bunnies and pastel colour schemes. The holiday has become a study in how capitalism absorbs and repackages anything, even resurrection. Let's talk numbers. In the United States alone, Easter generates over $20 billion in consumer spending annually. That's billion with a B. Americans buy more than 16 billion jelly beans for Easter, enough to circle the Earth 3 times if laid end to end. Over 90 million chocolate bunnies are produced each year. 76% of people eat the ears first, in case you were wondering. The average American household spends around $150 on Easter, candy, decorations, gifts, flowers, and that pastel-dressed little Emma will wear exactly once. How did we get here? Yet the commercialization of Easter began in earnest in the 19th century when advances in sugar production and chocolate manufacturing made candy affordable for the masses. Before that, Easter treats were homemade. Dyed eggs, sweet breads, simple cakes. But once companies like Cadbury in England and Whitman's in America started mass-producing chocolate eggs and candy, Easter became a market opportunity. By the early 20th century, Easter had become a retail bonanza. Department stores created elaborate Easter window displays featuring mechanical bunnies, chicks, and spring scenes. Greeting card companies like Hallmark churned out millions of Easter cards with pastel flowers and cheerful verses. Florists promoted Easter lilies, which became as essential to Easter as poinsettias are to Christmas. The holiday was no longer just about church, it was about shopping. The post-World War II economic boom supercharged Easter commercialization. Suburban families had disposable income and a hunger for wholesome, family-centered traditions. Companies responded by creating an ever-expanding universe of Easter products: chocolate eggs, marshmallow peeps, plastic grass, egg-dyeing kits, bunny-shaped everything. The Easter basket became a symbol of American prosperity, overflowing with candy, toys, and pastel-wrapped excess. Marketing campaigns pushed the Easter Bunny as a secular alternative to religious Easter, making the holiday accessible to non-Christians and comfortable for a pluralistic society. The Easter Bunny didn't preach, he just delivered candy. He was safe, friendly, and profitable. By the late 20th century, the Easter Bunny had become as recognizable as Santa Claus, and just as detached from the holiday's original meaning. Religious leaders often lament this commercialization, arguing that Easter has become more about chocolate than Christ. And they're not wrong. Walk into any store in March or April, and you'll see aisles of Easter merchandise with barely a cross or resurrection reference in sight. It's all bunnies, chicks, eggs, and spring flowers, symbols that nod to renewal and rebirth but never explicitly mention Jesus. But here's the thing, Commercialization hasn't killed religious Easter, it's just created a parallel Easter. On Easter Sunday, churches are still packed. Millions of Christians around the world still celebrate the resurrection with worship, prayer, and communion. The secular Easter and the sacred Easter coexist, and sometimes overlapping. Families going to church in the morning, then hunting eggs in the afternoon, sometimes completely separate. The commercialization of Easter is a reflection of modern capitalism's ability to absorb anything and turn it into a product. Christmas, Halloween, Valentine's Day. Every holiday with emotional or cultural resonance becomes a sales opportunity. Easter was no exception. The resurrection of Christ, once the cornerstone of Christian faith, now shares space with chocolate bunnies and marshmallow peeps. It's crass, it's absurd, and it's utterly human. We take the sacred and make it profitable because that's what we do. So yes, Easter is commercialized, but it's also still sacred to millions. The two versions of Easter, one spiritual, one consumer, exist side by side, neither quite able to eliminate the other. And maybe that's okay. Maybe a holiday can hold contradictions. Maybe you can celebrate resurrection and eat too much candy. Maybe the Easter Bunny and Jesus can share the day, each meaning something different to different people. It's messy, but most holidays are. For Christians in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and South America, Easter falls in autumn, not spring. The symbolism of rebirth and renewal clashes with falling leaves and cooling temperatures. Some churches acknowledge this awkwardness and adapt their imagery, others simply ignore it. The Easter Bunny hops through autumn leaves, eggs are hidden in crisp weather, and the holiday serves as a reminder that Christianity is a global religion trying to fit local seasons into a universal narrative. Imagine you're an Australian Christian. It's Easter Sunday. May you go to church and hear sermons about new life, spring renewal, and resurrection symbolized by blossoming flowers and baby animals. Then you walk outside into autumn. The leaves are turning brown. The temperature is dropping. Lambs were born 6 months ago and are now half-grown sheep. Nothing about the natural world around you matches the symbolism being preached from the pulpit. This is the reality for millions of Christians in the Southern Hemisphere. Easter's entire symbolic framework, borrowed from ancient spring festivals, assumes a Northern Hemisphere context. Spring equals rebirth. Winter equals death. Easter celebrates the transition from death to life, darkness to light, cold to warmth. But if you're south of the equator, Easter happens as the world is moving from light to darkness, warmth to cold, abundance to scarcity. See, the metaphor collapses. Some churches have tried to adapt. In Australia, progressive theologians have suggested reframing Easter around harvest themes rather than spring renewal. Autumn is a time of gathering, of reaping what was sown, of preparing for the leaner months ahead. Christ's death and resurrection could be understood through the lens of sacrifice and sustenance, the ultimate harvest, the bread of life gathered in. It's a creative theological pivot, but it hasn't really caught on. Most Australian churches still use Northern Hemisphere imagery because that's what the liturgy, the hymns and the tradition dictate. Then there's the Easter Bunny problem. Rabbits in Australia are actually an environmental disaster, an invasive species that has devastated native ecosystems since being introduced by European colonizers. Promoting the Easter Bunny feels to some Australians like celebrating an ecological villain. This led to the creation of the Easter bilby, an alternative Easter mascot. The bilby is a native Australian marsupial, a rabbit-eared bandicoot that's endangered and adorable. Conservationists and chocolate companies partnered to create chocolate bilbies, with proceeds going toward bilby conservation. It's a brilliant fusion of environmentalism, cultural adaptation, and marketing. The Easter bilby hasn't replaced the Easter bunny, but he's carved out his own niche in Australian Easter celebrations. In South Africa, Easter also falls in autumn, and the holiday carries additional layers of meaning related to the country's history. For many black South Africans, Easter is a time of pilgrimage and communal gathering, traditions that persisted even during apartheid when freedom of movement was restricted. Easter became a moment of spiritual and social resistance, a time to assert dignity and community in the face of oppression. Today, Easter in South Africa is still marked by large outdoor gatherings, church services that blend African and European traditions, and a palpable sense of renewal, not of spring but of hope. In South America, where Easter falls in autumn but the climate varies wildly from tropical to temperate, this seasonal mismatch is less jarring. In Brazil, Easter is called Páscoa and is celebrated with chocolate eggs, family gatherings, and religious processions. The autumn weather is mild and the focus is less on spring renewal and more on Christ's sacrifice and triumph over death. The symbolism works even without the spring context, because the resurrection story itself is powerful enough to transcend seasons. The Southern Hemisphere Easter dilemma reveals something important. Holidays are cultural constructs shaped by geography, history, and local context. Christianity may be a universal religion, but its holidays are rooted in specific times and places. When you export those holidays to different climates and seasons, things get weird. The theological meaning remains, but the symbolic framework creaks and groans under the weight of autumn leaves and falling temperatures. Still, millions of Southern Hemisphere Christians celebrate Easter with joy, reverence, and yes, chocolate eggs and bunny imagery, even though none of it quite fits their seasonal reality. They've learned to live with the contradiction, get to celebrate spring symbolism in autumn, and to find meaning in resurrection regardless of what the weather is doing. It's a testament to the adaptability of faith and the stubbornness of tradition. Easter may be awkward in the Southern Hemisphere, but it's also deeply loved. For many people today, Easter is entirely secular, a day for brunch, egg hunts, and family gatherings with no religious component whatsoever. The resurrection of Christ is optional. The chocolate eggs are not. This version of Easter, cultural, commercial, and cheerful, exists in parallel with religious observance, sometimes overlapping, often not. It's a holiday that means different things to different people, which is perhaps the most human thing about it. Let's be honest, for a huge portion of the population, Easter is about brunch. Not just any brunch, or a Easter brunch, the kind with bottomless mimosas, elaborate buffets, and a dress code that requires pastels. Hotels and restaurants across the country capitalize on Easter Sunday by offering special brunch menus with ham, eggs, Benedict, ironically fitting, fruit salads, and dessert stations featuring chocolate rabbits and cake shaped like carrots. Families dress up, make reservations weeks in advance, and spend Easter morning eating too much while wearing clothes they'll never wear again. This secular Easter has deep roots. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Easter became associated with fashion and social display. Easter bonnets, elaborate hats decorated with flowers, ribbons and feathers, became status symbols. Wearing new clothes on Easter Sunday was a way to signal prosperity and respectability. The Easter parade, particularly in New York City, became a secular ritual where people promenaded in their finest spring attire, showing off new hats, dresses, and suits. It wasn't about church, it was about being seen. The tradition continues today, even if Easter bonnets have mostly disappeared. Families still buy new Easter outfits, especially for children. Department stores promote Easter dresses, suits, and accessories. The implicit message is clear. Easter is an occasion, a moment to dress up and celebrate spring, regardless of your religious beliefs or church attendance. For children, secular Easter revolves around one thing: the Easter egg hunt. On Easter morning, kids wake up to find that the Easter Bunny has visited, leaving baskets filled with candy and hiding colourful eggs around the house or yard. The hunt itself is pure joy. Yes, children racing around, squealing with excitement, comparing their findings. It's a game, a tradition, and a sugar delivery system all in one. For many kids, this is Easter. Jesus doesn't enter the picture, and honestly, many parents are fine with that. In an increasingly secular society, Easter provides an opportunity to celebrate spring, family, and childhood wonder without requiring religious commitment. The Easter Bunny is a safe, neutral figure, not a religious icon, not a saint, just a friendly anthropomorphic rabbit who brings candy. He is accessible to everyone, regardless of faith. Jewish families, Muslim families, atheist families, plenty participate in secular Easter traditions because they're fun, harmless, and culturally ubiquitous. Secular Easter is also big business. As mentioned earlier, Americans spend billions on Easter candy, decorations, and gifts. Companies have successfully marketed Easter as a spring celebration rather than a religious holiday. Their advertising rarely mentions resurrection, Christ, or church. Instead, it's all about bunnies, chicks, flowers, and pastel colours, symbols that evoke spring and renewal without any theological baggage. Critics, particularly religious conservatives, argue that this secular Easter has hollowed out the holiday, turning it into a meaningless commercial spectacle. They see Easter egg hunts as distraction, Easter brunch as gluttony, and the Easter Bunny as a pagan idol. To them, Easter should be about one thing: Christ's resurrection. Everything else is noise, but defenders of secular Easter see it differently. They argue that holidays evolve, that traditions are flexible, and that there's nothing wrong with celebrating spring, family, and community, even without a religious framework. Easter, they say, can be many things to many people. It doesn't have to be purely religious or purely secular. It can be both, or neither, or something in between. The result is a fractured holiday where multiple versions of Easter coexist. The religious Easter focused on resurrection and salvation. The secular Easter focused on brunch and egg hunts, and various hybrid versions that blend both. Families go to church in the morning, then hunt eggs in the afternoon. They pray and they feast. They celebrate Christ and the Easter Bunny, seeing no contradiction because for them, Easter is big enough to hold both. This multiplicity is very modern and very American. A pluralistic approach to holidays where meaning is individualized, traditions are customizable, and everyone gets to celebrate in their own way. It drives purists crazy, but it also makes Easter one of the most widely celebrated holidays in the country, embraced by Christians and non-Christians alike. Secular Easter may lack theological depth, but it's inclusive, joyful, and deeply woven into cultural life. And in a diverse secular society, maybe that's enough. Some Christian denominations, particularly more conservative Protestant groups, reject Easter entirely because of its pagan associations. They argue that the name, the eggs, the rabbits, all of it, are corruptions of true faith. They celebrate the resurrection, but not Easter. Others embrace the holiday fully, seeing no contradiction between celebrating Christ and hiding eggs. The debate has raged for centuries and shows no signs of resolution. Let's start with the objections. For some Christians, the very name Easter is problematic. As we discussed earlier, it likely derives from Yosta, a possibly pagan goddess of spring. Even if the etymology is uncertain, the association with paganism is enough to make some believers uncomfortable. Why, they ask, would you name the most important Christian holiday after a pagan deity? Why not call it Resurrection Sunday and be done with it? Then there are the symbols. Eggs and rabbits have no biblical basis whatsoever. There's no mention of Easter eggs in the Gospels, no resurrection rabbits in the Book of Acts. These symbols, critics argue, come directly from pagan fertility rites and have been awkwardly grafted onto Christian celebration. Indeed, to participate in Easter egg hunts and Easter bunny traditions is, in their view, to engage in pagan practices thinly disguised as Christian celebration. Some denominations take this very seriously. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, don't celebrate Easter at all. They observe Christ's death and resurrection, but reject Easter as a pagan-influenced holiday with no scriptural support. Some fundamentalist and evangelical churches similarly discourage Easter traditions, urging members to focus solely on the biblical account of the resurrection without the cultural accretions. There's also the date issue. Easter's calculation, tied to the lunar calendar and the spring equinox, connects it to ancient pagan spring festivals. Some Christians argue that this astronomical tie is itself pagan, a vestige of sun and moon worship that has no place in Christian practice. They advocate celebrating the resurrection on a historically accurate date, rather than one determined by pagan calendrical systems. On the other side of the debate are Christians who see no problem with Easter traditions. They argue that Christianity has always adapted local customs and symbols, baptizing them and giving them new meaning. Yes, eggs and rabbits come from pagan traditions, but so what? They've been Christianized. The egg now represents the tomb of Christ, not fertility. These symbols have been redeemed, transformed, and incorporated into Christian practice. It's not compromise, it's cultural engagement. These Christians point out that nearly every Christian holiday has absorbed non-Christian elements. Christmas trees, pagan. Yule logs, pagan. Wedding rings, pagan. Candles in churches, pagan. If you tried to strip Christianity of every tradition with pagan origins, you'd be left with almost nothing. The faith has always been incarnational, taking root in specific times and places, absorbing local practices and transforming them. Furthermore, many Christians argue that Easter egg hunts and Easter bunny traditions are harmless fun that make the holiday more engaging for children. They're not worship, they're celebration. Kids hunting for eggs aren't worshipping fertility goddesses, they're having fun. And if those traditions make Easter memorable and joyful for children, then they serve a good purpose, helping families celebrate together and creating positive associations with the holiday. The debate often comes down to different theological emphases. Even more conservative Christians emphasize purity, keeping Christian practice free from pagan contamination. More progressive or mainline Christians emphasize incarnation, God entering the world and sanctifying it, including its cultures and traditions. Neither side is likely to convince the other. Some churches have found middle ground. They hold Resurrection Sunday services that avoid Easter language while still acknowledging the holiday. They explain the pagan origins of eggs and rabbits in sermons. then let families decide whether to participate in those traditions. They focus on the biblical narrative while acknowledging that people celebrate in culturally conditioned ways. The controversy over Easter's paganism will never fully resolve because it's really a debate about two different visions of Christianity. One that seeks purity and separation from the world, and one that seeks engagement and transformation of culture. Easter, with its layers of pagan and Christian symbolism, forces this debate to the surface every spring. And every spring, both sides dig in, convinced they're right. Meanwhile, most people just hide eggs and go to church or don't, and the holiday continues, pagan origins and all. Easter spread around the world alongside Christianity, carried by missionaries, colonizers, and merchants. In some places it was embraced and adapted, in others it was imposed. Indigenous cultures incorporated their own spring traditions into Easter celebrations, creating unique hybrid festivals. The result is a global patchwork of Easter observances, each reflecting local history, theology, and culture. When European missionaries fanned out across the globe from the 16th century onward, Easter came with them. But they quickly discovered what early Christians in Europe had learned. You can't simply transplant a holiday from one culture to another and expect it to take root unchanged. People bring their own traditions, symbols, and meanings to any celebration, and Easter was no exception. In Latin America, Spanish conquistadors and Catholic missionaries encountered indigenous civilizations with their own rich traditions of ritual, sacrifice, and seasonal celebration. The missionaries didn't eliminate these traditions, they layered Christianity on top. The result was a unique synthesis. In Mexico, for example, Bunnies Easter processions incorporated pre-Columbian music, dance, and imagery. Indigenous peoples saw parallels between Christ's sacrifice and their own traditions of ritual offerings. The crucifixion resonated deeply in cultures where blood sacrifice had been central to religious life. Easter became a hybrid celebration, Catholic in theology, indigenous in expression. In the Philippines, Spanish colonizers brought Easter traditions in the 16th century, but Filipino culture transformed them. The extreme penitential practices, flagellation, crucifixion reenactments may have roots in pre-colonial rituals involving physical ordeal and blood offerings. Filipino Easter blends Catholic passion narratives with indigenous concepts of sacrifice, penance, and community healing. It's Easter, but it's also distinctly Filipino, each shaped by centuries of cultural fusion. In Africa, Christian missionaries arrived with Easter traditions, but African converts adapted them to local contexts. In Ethiopia, Christianity arrived in the 4th century, long before European colonization, and Ethiopian Easter, Fasika, developed independently, blending African cultural practices with ancient Christian liturgy. In other parts of Africa, colonizers imposed Easter traditions, but African Christians made them their own. Easter services incorporated African music, dance, and storytelling traditions. The resurrection narrative was reinterpreted through African cosmologies that already understood death as transformation rather than ending. In Asia, Easter's spread was slower and more contested. In India, where Christianity has ancient roots in Kerala but was also brought by European colonizers, Easter took on multiple forms. Syrian Christians in Kerala celebrate with traditional Indian foods and customs, while Catholic and Protestant communities in other regions reflect Portuguese, British, or American missionary influences. In China and Japan, where Christianity remains a minority religion, Easter is barely celebrated outside Christian communities, though chocolate companies have tried to introduce Easter as a commercial holiday with limited success. The global spread of Easter also carried less savoury elements. Colonizers often use Christianity, including Easter, as a tool of cultural domination. Indigenous peoples were forced to abandon their own seasonal celebrations and adopt Christian holidays. In some cases, as traditional spring festivals were banned and replaced with Easter. This wasn't enculturation, it was cultural erasure. The trauma of colonization can't be separated from the spread of Easter and other Christian holidays. Yet even in contexts of colonial imposition, indigenous peoples found ways to preserve their traditions. They practiced what scholars call syncretism, blending Christian and indigenous beliefs in ways that allowed them to appear Christian while maintaining their own spiritual practices. Easter became a site of resistance and adaptation, a holiday that looked Christian on the surface but carried hidden layers of indigenous meaning. Today, Easter is celebrated on every continent, in nearly every country, but it looks different everywhere. Ethiopian Fasika, Filipino Semana Santa, Mexican Pascua, American Easter, Australian Autumn Easter. Each is recognizably Easter, but also distinctly local. The resurrection of Christ is the theological core, but the cultural expression varies wildly, shaped by local history, climate, and tradition. The global spread of Easter reveals both the adaptability of Christianity and the resilience of local cultures. Christianity may have been imposed by colonizers, but it couldn't erase local traditions. It could only absorb and be changed by them. The result is a global holiday that is simultaneously universal and particular, the same and different, imposed and embraced. Easter is everywhere, but it belongs to everyone in different ways. As society becomes more secular and multicultural, Easter's place in public life is shifting. Fewer people attend church, more participate in egg hunts. The holiday's religious and cultural meanings continue to diverge, yet Easter persists, adaptable as ever, because its core themes, renewal, hope, life after death, are universally resonant, whether you frame them in Christian theology or simply as the joy of spring. Let's talk numbers. Church attendance in many Western countries has been declining for decades. In the United States, regular church attendance has dropped significantly, especially among younger generations. Yet Easter, along with Christmas, remains one of the few days when churches see a surge in attendance. These twice-a-year Christians, sometimes called Christers, Christmas and Easter, show up for the big holidays, even if they skip every other Sunday. For many, Easter is a cultural tradition, a family ritual, and a vague spiritual gesture all rolled into one. Yeah, but what happens when even Christers stop showing up? Some churches are already adapting. They're holding outdoor Easter sunrise services that feel less like traditional worship and more like community gatherings. They're shortening services, adding contemporary music, and downplaying theological complexity in favor of accessible messages about hope and new beginnings. They're recognizing that for many attendees, Easter is less about doctrine and more about connection to family, to tradition, to something larger than themselves. Meanwhile, secular Easter continues to grow. Egg hunts, Easter brunches, and chocolate bunnies require no religious commitment, making them accessible to everyone. In multicultural societies where religious diversity is the norm, secular Easter provides a common cultural touchpoint. Jews, Muslims, atheists And Buddhists can all participate in an Easter egg hunt without compromising their own beliefs. It's become a spring celebration that transcends religion. Some religious leaders are troubled by this trajectory. They see Easter becoming hollowed out, reduced to candy and bunnies with no spiritual substance. They worry that future generations will have no idea what Easter is actually about, that the resurrection narrative will be lost in a sea of pastel commercialism. And they're probably right to worry. Cultural memory is fragile. Traditions can persist long after their meanings are forgotten. We're already at a point where many children know the Easter Bunny but couldn't tell you the Easter story. But maybe that's okay. Maybe holidays don't need fixed meanings. Maybe they can evolve, adapt, and mean different things to different generations. Easter has already undergone massive transformations, from pagan spring festival to Christian resurrection celebration to commercial extravaganza. Why should it stop evolving now? There's also a case to be made that Easter's secular elements have actually helped preserve the holiday. In countries where Christianity is declining, secular Easter keeps the date on the calendar. It keeps families gathering, keeps communities celebrating, keeps the rhythm of the year marked by something special. If Easter were purely religious, it might fade as religiosity fades. But because it's also cultural and commercial, it persists. The secular elements act as a kind of life support, keeping Easter alive even as its original meaning becomes obscure. Technology is also changing Easter. Just virtual church services exploded during the COVID pandemic and haven't entirely disappeared. Some people now attend Easter service from their couches in pajamas, streaming it on their phones. Is that still Easter? Is watching a sermon on YouTube the same as gathering in a physical church? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're shaping Easter's future. Climate change is another factor. As weather patterns shift, the connection between Easter and spring becomes less reliable. Unseasonably cold Easter Sundays or unseasonal heat, waves disrupt the symbolic alignment between resurrection and spring renewal. In a century, Easter might lose even its seasonal connection, becoming just a date on the calendar with no natural world reference point. Yet for all these changes, Easter shows remarkable staying power. The themes of death and rebirth, darkness and light, suffering and hope, these are human universals. They resonate across cultures, religions, and generations. As long as people experience loss and long for renewal, Easter's core message will remain relevant, even if the form changes beyond recognition. The future of Easter is uncertain, but it's probably safe to say it will look different from today's Easter. It may be more secular, more commercialized, more technologically mediated. Or maybe there will be a religious revival that restores Easter's Christian focus. Maybe both versions, sacred and secular, will continue to coexist, diverging further, but both called Easter. Whatever happens, the holiday will adapt, because that's what Easter has always done. It's a survivor, a shapeshifter, a holiday that has weathered 2,000 years of change. It'll probably weather the next 1,000 too. So why eggs and bunnies? Because humans have always celebrated spring with symbols of fertility and rebirth. Because Christianity absorbed and Christianized those symbols. Because traditions are stubborn, evolving, and deeply human. The Easter egg and the Easter bunny are not contradictions. They're proof that holidays are living things, shaped by centuries of culture, belief, commerce, and creativity. They're weird, wonderful, and entirely ours. Let's pull it all together. Eggs became Easter symbols because they were already spring symbols, used by ancient peoples across continents to represent life, creation, and renewal. They were perfect metaphors, inert on the outside, life-giving on the inside. Then, when Christianity encountered these traditions, it didn't destroy them. It reinterpreted them. The egg became the tomb, the cracking became resurrection. It was theological brilliance and practical wisdom combined. Rabbits, or more accurately, hares, became Easter symbols for similar reasons. They were ancient fertility symbols, creatures so prolific that they came to represent the unstoppable force of life itself. They were associated with goddesses, with the moon, with springtime rituals. They were mysterious, liminal creatures that lived between the wild and the domestic, between earth and myth. When Christianity absorbed spring festivals, a hare came along for the ride, gradually transforming from sacred animal to magical Easter hare to the Easter bunny we know today. The genius of Easter is that it's layered. It's not one thing. It's many things stacked on top of each other like archaeological strata. At the bottom, you have ancient pagan spring festivals celebrating fertility and the return of life after winter. Above that, you have Christian theology about Christ's death and resurrection. Above that, medieval folk traditions, egg decorating, egg games, the Easter hare. Above that, commercial capitalism turning the holiday into a retail bonanza. And on top, you have contemporary secular celebrations focused on family, fun, and chocolate. Each layer adds meaning without completely erasing what came before. When a child hunts for Easter eggs, they're participating in a tradition that connects them to medieval peasants, to ancient Persians, to pre-Christian Europeans, and to modern consumer culture all at once. The egg they find might be plastic and filled with candy, but it still carries echoes of thousands of years of human celebration. This is why attempts to purify Easter, to strip away the pagan elements, or eliminate the commercial aspects always fail. You can't separate Easter into neat categories because it's inherently messy. The pagan and the Christian, the sacred and the secular, the ancient and the modern, they're all tangled together, inseparable. Trying to pull them apart would destroy the holiday itself. The Easter bunny and the Easter egg aren't corruptions of a pure Christian holiday. They're evidence that Easter was never pure to begin with. From its earliest days, Easter was a hybrid, a fusion of resurrection theology and spring celebration. It was Christianity meeting the world and adapting to local cultures, absorbing their symbols and giving those symbols new meaning. And honestly, that's beautiful. It means Easter belongs to everyone, to Christians celebrating resurrection, to children hunting eggs, to ancient peoples honouring spring, to families gathering for brunch, to cultures around the world who've made Easter their own. It's a holiday big enough to hold contradictions, flexible enough to evolve, and human enough to survive. So why eggs and bunnies at Easter? Because humans needed symbols for spring, for rebirth, for hope that life continues after death. We found those symbols in eggs and rabbits, and we've been using them for thousands of years. Christianity gave those symbols new meaning, but it didn't erase their old meanings. Instead, the meanings layered, multiplied, and evolved. The Easter egg is a tomb and a fertility symbol and a chocolate treat all at once. The Easter bunny is a sacred hare and a fertility symbol and a corporate mascot simultaneously. It's weird. It's contradictory. It makes no logical sense, and that's exactly why it works. Because humans are weird and contradictory. Our holidays are messy because our history is messy. Our symbols carry multiple meanings because our lives have multiple dimensions. Easter eggs and bunnies are strange symbols for a resurrection, but they're perfect symbols for a holiday that has absorbed 2,000 years of human culture, belief, commerce, and joy. So next Easter, when you see a chocolate bunny or dye an egg, remember, you're not just participating in a modern commercial tradition. You're connecting to an ancient human impulse to celebrate spring, to mark the return of life, to hope for renewal. You're standing in a long line of people, pagan and Christian, ancient and modern, who looked at the world coming back to life and decided to celebrate with eggs and rabbits. It's absurd, it's beautiful, and it's profoundly human. Easter forces us to hold two opposite truths at once, that it's deeply sacred and utterly silly. That the resurrection of Christ, the cornerstone of Christian faith, the moment that split history in two, is celebrated with chocolate bunnies and marshmallow peeps. That the most solemn moment in Christian theology coexist with egg hunts, pastel baskets, and department store sales. This contradiction makes some people uncomfortable. It shouldn't. The contradiction is the point. Humans have always mixed the sacred and the silly. Yeah, religious rituals across cultures blend reverence with humour, solemnity with festivity. Medieval churches featured gargoyles, grotesque comic sculptures on sacred buildings. Jewish Purim celebrations include costumes and carnival-like revelry. Hindu festivals mix devotion with play. The sacred and the profane aren't opposites. They're companions. Two sides of the same human impulse to mark important moments with intensity and joy. Easter's mix of resurrection and rabbits reflects this ancient wisdom. Yes, the resurrection is profound. It's about death, salvation, and eternal life. But Easter is also about spring, about life returning, about joy and celebration. Why shouldn't that include fun, candy, and children laughing as they hunt for eggs? Why should celebrating resurrection require solemnity every moment? Some Christians have argued that the silliness cheapens the sacred, that chocolate bunnies trivialize Christ's sacrifice. But maybe they're looking at it wrong. Maybe the silly elements don't diminish the sacred, they make it accessible. A child too young to understand theology can understand an egg hunt. A family that doesn't go to church can still gather for Easter brunch and feel connected to something larger than themselves. The silly elements are on-ramps, ways for people to participate in the holiday, even if they don't fully grasp or accept its religious meaning. There's also something profoundly human about our need to lighten heavy moments. Funerals often include laughter amid tears. Weddings mix solemn vows with silly traditions like cake smashing. We need both, the gravity and the levity. Easter's resurrection narrative is heavy. Betrayal, torture, death, cosmic implications. Without the lightness of egg hunts and candy, it might be too heavy to bear. The silly elements provide relief, a way to celebrate without drowning in the weight of meaning. The secular and religious elements of Easter also allow the holiday to function on multiple levels simultaneously. For a devout Christian, Easter morning might include worship, communion, and deep reflection on Christ's sacrifice. For their children, the same morning includes finding eggs and eating chocolate. Both are happening at once, and both are valid. The adult's sacred experience doesn't cancel out the child's silly one, and vice versa. They coexist, and the holiday is richer for it. This multiplicity also makes Easter more resilient, a holiday that serves only one purpose. Religious, commercial, or cultural is fragile. If religiosity declines, a purely religious holiday might disappear. But Easter, with its layers of meaning, can survive changes in society. Even as church attendance drops, Easter persists because it's also about spring, family, tradition, and yes, candy. These secular elements keep the holiday alive during periods of religious decline, and the religious elements keep it meaningful during periods of secular excess. There's a lesson here about how traditions survive, not by remaining pure, but by remaining flexible. Easter has survived because it adapted, absorbed, and welcomed contradictions. It said yes to pagan symbols, yes to Christian theology, yes to commercial capitalism, yes to cultural evolution. It's a holiday that refuses to be just one thing, and that refusal is its strength. Yeah, so maybe we should stop being uncomfortable with Easter's contradictions and start celebrating them. Yes, it's weird that the resurrection and chocolate bunnies go together. Yes, it's odd that the same day includes church services and egg hunts. But that weirdness is a feature, not a bug. It's proof that humans are complex, that holidays are living traditions, and that the sacred and the silly can not only coexist but enhance each other. Easter is contradiction made celebration, and that's exactly why it's lasted 2,000 years. Strip away the eggs, the bunnies, the chocolate, the centuries of accumulated tradition, and what's left? A message, a hope, a stubborn insistence that death doesn't get the last word. Whether you understand that message through Christian resurrection, pagan spring festivals, or simply the return of warmth after winter, Easter is ultimately about renewal, the most basic and universal human hope. Every culture, every religion, every human who has ever lived has grappled with death. It's the one universal experience, the one certainty. And every culture has also created stories, rituals, and celebrations that push back against death's finality. We tell stories about rebirth, resurrection, reincarnation. We celebrate moments when life returns, the first flowers of spring, the birth of a child, the recovery from illness. Easter is one of humanity's most successful and enduring expressions of this hope. For Christians, Easter is the literal truth. Christ died and rose again, defeating death and offering eternal life to believers. It's not metaphor, it's history, the foundation of faith. But even for those who don't accept the literal resurrection, Easter's message resonates, because we all know death, and we all long for renewal. Spring itself is a kind of resurrection. The earth that looked dead all winter suddenly erupts with life. Seeds that seemed lifeless sprout. Trees that looked dead burst with green. Animals emerge from hibernation. It's not metaphorical rebirth, it's real, observable renewal. Ancient peoples celebrated spring not because they were simple or superstitious, but because they were paying attention. They saw the world come back from the dead every year, and it filled them with hope that maybe somehow they would too. Easter taps into this deep human longing. We want to believe that endings aren't final, that loss can be redeemed, that death is not a period but a comma. We want to believe that winter always gives way to spring, that darkness always surrenders to light, that suffering is not meaningless. Easter says yes to all of that. It's a cosmic affirmation. Life wins. Not easily, not without cost, but it wins. This is why Easter survives in secular forms. Even people who reject Christianity's theological claims still respond to Easter's message. They dye eggs because eggs symbolize potential, new life contained in a fragile shell. They celebrate spring because spring is hope made visible. They gather with family because renewal is best experienced in community. The forms may be secular, but the underlying hope is the same. Easter also reminds us that renewal often requires death, or at least an ending. Seeds must fall into the ground and die before they can sprout, and caterpillars must dissolve in the chrysalis before becoming butterflies. Winter must kill the old growth before spring can bring new. In Christian theology, Christ's death was necessary for resurrection. In natural cycles, death is necessary for renewal. Easter holds this difficult truth. You can't have rebirth without first having death. Transformation requires letting go. This message is both comforting and challenging. Comforting because it offers hope that our losses, our suffering, our endings might lead to something new. Challenging because it requires us to accept that we must let go, must move through darkness, must endure the tomb before we can experience resurrection. There's no skipping ahead to Easter morning without going through Good Friday. In a world that often feels dark, filled with loss, grief, injustice and suffering, Easter's message is almost defiant. It refuses to accept that darkness has the final word. It insists, against all evidence and reason, that light will return, that life will triumph, that renewal is possible. That's a radical message, whether you frame it religiously or not. And maybe that's the real reason Easter has endured for 2,000 years. Not because of eggs or bunnies, not because of clever theology or successful marketing, but because humans need hope. We need to believe that renewal is possible, that endings aren't final, that spring always follows winter. Easter gives us that hope, wrapped in chocolate, painted on eggs, preached from pulpits, and whispered in a return of flowers after a long, cold winter. It's a hope we'll never stop needing, which means Easter will never stop being celebrated. After all this, after tracing Easter's journey from ancient spring festivals to modern chocolate aisles, after examining eggs and bunnies, paganism and Christianity, commerce and culture, one truth remains. We don't fully understand Easter. Not really. We know its history, but histories are incomplete. We know its symbols, but symbols are slippery. We know its meanings, but meanings multiply. And that's okay. Maybe it's even perfect, because the best holidays, like the best stories, hold mysteries we can't quite solve. Why do we really celebrate Easter? For Christians, the answer is clear: Christ's resurrection. But even devout Christians participate in traditions, egg hunts, Easter baskets, chocolate bunnies that have nothing to do with the resurrection. Are they celebrating two different things at once? Or is it all somehow connected? Where ask 10 Christians and you'll get 10 different answers. For non-religious people, the question is even murkier. Why celebrate a Christian holiday if you're not Christian? Because it's about spring is one answer, because its tradition is another, because my kids like it is a third. All are valid, but none quite captures why Easter persists so strongly in secular culture. Why this holiday? Why eggs specifically? Why the bunny? The answers are historical, but the feeling is deeper. Something about renewal, about hope, about marking time with celebration. Maybe we celebrate Easter because it gives us permission to hope. In the middle of ordinary life, with its ordinary struggles, losses and disappointments, Easter interrupts and says, renewal is real. Whether you believe in literal resurrection or just in the metaphor of spring, may Easter insist that things can get better, that life returns, that dark times end. We need that message, especially when things are hard, and we need it regularly, annually, so we don't forget. Or maybe we celebrate Easter because humans are ritual creatures. We need rhythms, patterns, yearly celebrations that mark time and give it meaning. Without holidays, the year is just an endless march of weeks. With them, time has shape, punctuation, moments that matter. Easter marks spring. It marks the end of winter's deprivation and the beginning of abundance. It's a reset button, a collective exhale, a moment to gather with family and community and celebrate survival. Or maybe, and this might be the truest answer, we celebrate Easter because our ancestors did, and their ancestors before them, stretching back thousands of years. You see, we celebrate because celebration is what humans do. We mark moments, we create symbols, we eat special foods, wear special clothes, tell special stories. It's how we make meaning, how we connect to each other and to the past. Easter is ours because it's been handed down to us, changed by each generation but still recognizable, still Easter. The mystery of Easter is that it contains multitudes. It's Christian and pagan, sacred and secular, ancient and modern, serious and silly. It's about death and chocolate, resurrection and eggs, theology and bunnies. These contradictions don't cancel each other out. They layer, creating depth and resonance. Easter means different things to different people, and somehow that makes it more powerful, not less. There's something beautiful about celebrating what we don't fully understand. It's an act of faith. Not necessarily religious faith, but human faith. Faith that meaning exists even when we can't articulate it. Faith that traditions matter even when their origins are murky. Faith that gathering together, dyeing eggs, hiding them for children, eating chocolate, going to church or not, celebrating spring or resurrection or just family, all of it matters somehow. So why eggs and bunnies at Easter? Because they're symbols that have accumulated meaning over millennia. Because they connect us to ancient peoples who celebrated spring. Because Christianity adopted them and gave them new meaning. Because capitalism commercialized them and made them accessible. Because children love them and adults remember loving them. Because they're silly and sacred, meaningless and profound, ridiculous and beautiful all at once. Easter doesn't demand perfect understanding. It doesn't require theological sophistication or historical knowledge or even religious belief. It just asks that you show up, participate, celebrate in whatever way feels right to you. Hunt some eggs, eat some chocolate. Go to church or don't. Gather with family or friends. Celebrate resurrection, spring, renewal, or just the fact that you survived another winter and here's another spring. The mystery remains, and that's okay. Some things are better left mysterious, better experienced than explained. Easter is one of them. So when Easter morning comes, don't worry too much about why there's a bunny or what the eggs really mean or whether it's too pagan or too commercial. Just celebrate. Because that's what humans have been doing for thousands of years. And that's what we'll keep doing for thousands more. Happy Easter. Now go find those eggs. Pisanki are proof that symbols can carry multiple meanings simultaneously without contradiction. The same egg can honour Christ's resurrection and invoke ancient spring rituals. It can be a prayer, a talisman, a work of art, and a family heirloom. The beauty of Pisanki isn't just in their intricate designs, it's in their ability to hold centuries of belief, culture and tradition in a single fragile shell. They are quite literally history you can hold in your hand, if you're very, very careful. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your climate-controlled bedroom, with indoor plumbing and access to chocolate whenever you want it, maybe take a moment to appreciate the absurd, beautiful journey that brought us Easter eggs and bunnies. Think about the ancient peoples who watched winter kill the world every year and then watched spring bring it back to life. They didn't have science to explain it, so they made it sacred. They painted eggs, honoured rabbits, and threw festivals celebrating the return of warmth and green things and hope. They were just trying to survive, to make sense of the cycles that governed their lives, to find meaning in a world that was often brutal and short. Think about the early Christians who saw in Christ's resurrection the ultimate triumph of life over death, the thing that every spring festival had been pointing toward all along. They didn't destroy the old symbols, they transformed them. They said, yes, the egg is sacred, and here's why. Yes, spring is resurrection, and here's the story. Yeah, they took humanity's oldest hopes and gave them new names, new meanings, and a new narrative that would echo across 2,000 years. Think about the medieval peasants who fasted through Lent, then exploded into Easter celebration with blessed eggs, games, and feasts. Think about the German immigrants who carried the Easter hare across the ocean in their memories and planted him in American soil. Think about the Victorian families who made Easter elegant. Think about the chocolate makers who made it delicious. Think about the advertisers who made it commercial. Think about the children, millions and millions of children across centuries, who woke up on Easter morning to hunt for eggs and felt pure, uncomplicated joy. Every Easter egg you've ever found, every chocolate bunny you've ever eaten, every pastel dress you've ever worn connects you to this long, strange, wonderful chain of human celebration. You're part of a tradition that stretches back before Christianity, before Rome, before written history, back to the first humans who noticed that spring returns and decided that was worth celebrating. Is it weird that we celebrate the resurrection of Christ with eggs and rabbits? Absolutely. Is it strange that a solemn religious holiday became a commercial extravaganza? Without question. Is it odd that we tell children a giant bunny breaks into the house to hide eggs? Completely bonkers. But that's humanity for you. We're weird. Our traditions are messy. Our holidays make no logical sense because they weren't designed by committee. They evolved, accumulated, absorbed, and transformed over thousands of years of human culture. Easter is pagan and Christian, sacred and silly, ancient and modern, meaningful and meaningless all at once. It's a glorious mess of contradictions, and that's exactly why it works. Because humans are contradictions. We're capable of profound spirituality and ridiculous silliness. We need sacred rituals and chocolate bunnies. We crave meaning and joy, theology and egg hunts, resurrection and springtime and family gatherings. And yes, candy. Lots of candy. So whether you celebrate Easter as a Christian honouring Christ's resurrection, as a cultural participant enjoying spring traditions, as a parent making memories with your kids, or as someone who just really likes Cadbury creamy eggs, you're doing it right. Because Easter is big enough for all of it. It always has been. The eggs will keep being dyed. The bunnies will keep hopping through our imaginations. Churches will fill on Easter Sunday and so will brunch restaurants. Children will hunt for eggs. And theologians will debate the resurrection, and both will be celebrating Easter in their own way. The holiday will continue to evolve, to absorb new meanings, to adapt to new cultures, because that's what Easter has always done. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and sleep pulls you under, remember this. You live in a world where the most important holiday in Christianity is celebrated with chocolate rabbits and painted eggs. You live in a time when ancient pagan symbols and Christian theology coexist peacefully in pastel baskets. You live in an era when you can trace a straight line from Mesopotamian spring festivals to your local grocery store's Easter candy aisle. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's deeply, wonderfully human. And somehow thousands of years after the first person painted an egg to celebrate spring, we're still doing it. Still celebrating renewal, still hoping for resurrection, still marking the return of light after darkness. The symbols have changed meanings. The stories have been rewritten. The chocolate has gotten better, but the hope remains the same. So rest easy tonight, knowing that Easter, weird, contradictory, commercial, sacred Easter will be there next spring, just like it has been for millennia. The eggs will be hidden, the bunnies will be chocolate, the hope will be real. And that's the story of why eggs and bunnies became Easter symbols. Not because it makes sense, but because humans needed symbols for hope. And eggs and bunnies were perfect. Mysterious, fertile, ancient, and alive with possibility. Just like spring. Just like faith. Just like us. Sleep well. And if you dream of ancient goddesses, resurrection stories, and rabbits that lay eggs, well, now you know why. Good night.